Hi, everybody. I'm sure all of you are enjoying this retreat of MFA. I'm the one who missing out this whole fun. Let me take you through today's session on climate change and migration. And my presentation will concentrate on what MFA can particularly do in coming years in the area of climate change related migration. I'll just set the global context first. The Groundswell report heard about in 2021 actually successfully draw the global attention on the issue that climate change induces migration and displacement. And without concrete measure, slow onset processes of climate change can alone displace 216 million people. 86 million of this will be displaced in sub-Saharan Africa, 49 in East Asia, 40 million in South Asia, and of these 40 million, 19 million will be in Bangladesh. 19 million in North Africa, 17 million in Latin America, and 5 million in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Rapid onset processes as well displace people. In 2020 alone, 30.7 million people were displaced, and in 2021, there were 23.7 million new displacees. What are the slow onset processes? High temperature, desertification, and these are the slow onset processes. And rapid onset processes, if you think, we all know flood, cyclone, tornado, these are slow onset processes. That climate change affects the whole community. However, it is the, various forms of socioeconomic inequality that makes the poorer population, disadvantaged population, suffer more from climate change related migration. And then again, we also have to remember climate change not only just cause migration directly, indirectly also it causes migration. How? It exacerbates various forms of vulnerabilities that people have, pushes on top of that, and that generates migration. It is usually said that climate induced migration are mostly internal and mostly from rural to semi-urban or urban areas. However, climate change related migration also take place internationally. If we think of short-term contract migration, in certain climate hotspots of Bangladesh where we did research, we found that 32% of those who have migrated to different Middle Eastern and Southeast Asian countries. Next issue that I would like to discuss is that the global actions on climate change. Two major things are in the IPCC agenda and everything, which is adaptation and mitigation. So far, adaptation means that people, those who have been affected by climate change, will be provided with certain services, and due to those local level adaptation services, people, their economic situation will be better off or remain the same, either resilience or adaptive due to those activities. Therefore, climate change effect can be kept bare minimum. But then again, only 30% of the funding is used in local level adaptation, and 70% of the funding is used in mitigation. Who receives the mitigation funding? Mostly developed countries. So therefore, here as well, you can see those who are suffering, funding allocation is less in their case. Now let us come to this whole issue of loss and damage. What is loss and damage? Loss and damage means when, uh, you know, people who are trying to adapt to climate change, those measures have completed. Even then, their situation cannot be brought into what they were before the climate change affected them. So therefore, it is considered as loss and damage. What needs to be done when it is beyond adaptation, then loss and damage would come up with compensation. This also developed countries never agreed to discuss in various forums. It is only in the 2015, I think, for the first time, the you know, different groups particularly agreed that they will discuss loss and damage. But again, politics is there. They will only discuss loss and damage if all the countries, participating countries, sign that they will not blame the developed countries or polluting countries. Therefore, you cannot ask for compensation, loss and damage for which this whole thing was developed. What? On the contrary, the developed countries have suggested, or in the conferences of parties, different copies suggested, is that 30% that we provide you for adaptation, from there you can take some money for loss and damage. Migration will take place, and climate change in some cases, you know, will push migration, influence migration. However, Sendai Framework, UN Sendai Framework, the Cancun Adaptation Framework, as well as the Groundswell report says that 80% of the displacement, that forced migration, 80% of the displacement can be reduced through right kind of action. Mind you, don't think that all kinds of migration can be reduced, climate induced migration. Where I think MFA has a major role to play to decide, or to advocate for reduction of displacement through different state level, region level, global level actions. In that case, I think compact is something where MFA is involved in a major way. So if I just put a little bit, this into perspective, that we all know that during compact discussion, regional discussions, and then as well in the New York, the progress declaration that where all of you participated, state parties and others discussed climate change and migration a lot. But when you look into the Progress Declaration report, there you see very limited mention of climate change. This is what happens. Civil society, countries, they try their best. But then again, when the final document is written, you see that these type of issues are avoided or mentioned as little as possible. So that is where we have to make sure that in compact, developments, just rather mentioning to development of concrete action takes place, that climate change affects community, but at the same time, it doesn't affect the whole of a community on a same way. Think of gender. Our studies have shown that priorities that women would like to see in adaptation in is different than men. Men in the rural context discuss more and more about income loss, livelihood loss, agricultural land loss. Women talk about homestead loss, uh, kitchen garden sort of loss, land loss, and they talk about lack of access to different relief activities that take place, uh, during different disastrous and other events. So it is different for men and women. Coming to urban areas, men talk about informality of job, men talk about in the climate induced situation, where they work, those issues, and eviction, then security threat, police bribe, these things. Women talk about their workplace sort of insecurities, their in the manufacturing sector, they talk about lack of childcare, where they're keeping their children, and then again, waterlogging and other areas where children go to school from there. So, children's priority, women's priority, men's priority, and elderly's priority are different. Therefore, when we are thinking about measures to, adaptation programs on climate change, as well as loss and damage from climate change, I think these are the important things. It has to be segregated on the basis of gender, age, and ethnicity as well. Certain ethnic communities face certain problems, geographic location wise, variation takes place. So, I will like to discuss a little bit of steps that are suggested globally in case what needs to be done in the area of climate change related migration. First and foremost, where MFA is very much involved, is cut global greenhouse gases to reduce pressure that drive climate migration. Close development gaps, restore vital ecosystem, spend 50% of the climate fund in helping people to adapt, create mechanism of loss and damage. So far, they are trying to push loss and damage into the same funding of adaptation. But we should be fighting for a separate mechanism, institutional mechanism for loss and damage, as well as separate funding for loss and damage. Integrate climate migration into far-sighted, green, resilient, inclusive development plans. So this is where ILO comes in. Invest understanding on the drivers of climate migration through evidence-based research. We do lack research, particularly when you think about differential impacts of climate change in different community members, disability, and others, including studies. Then generate data, identify in and out hotspots of migration, climate related migration. Then you can concentrate your actions. Now, some will move, yet some will remain in their habitual residence. Therefore, create alternative livelihood for those who remain in origin areas. That is what currently governments and others are doing. But receiving areas are still mostly unprepared to accommodate new migrants. Initiatives, 100 mayors of different cities have taken an initiative and said, committed that in the urban location, we will look into new migrants problem, and we will make development of the cities inclusive to new migrants. So that's where, how they are in the cities, that can be studied, and then that can be pushed into different country contexts, that how their rights should be accommodated in any development plans, any urban development programs. From this discussion, I would say four issues directly comes up. One is in the area of compact. MFA can do major role in bringing climate change induced migration into declaration statement and others. Then helping internal migrants in the urban, articulating their interest in urban location, as well as those who have migrated internationally there from climate affected areas, and then those who are using migration as an adaptation tool, about their right, about how things, services should be taken to climate hotspot areas. That can be MFA's work. And then the national strategy. Each country requires a national strategy to handle displacement and climate induced migration. So that national strategy in Bangladeshi context, Ramru has prepared. So we can develop a template. Based on that template, other countries under MFA leadership can try to develop such strategy. And in the loss and damage, what I would request MFA to work on is that development of mechanism, allocation of funding for loss and damage where adaptation is no longer viable. Thank you very much.